So I have downloaded the responsive page review zipped folder, and I've extracted it into documents. And make sure that you are opening pages from the folder that is not zipped. And for those of you that are not familiar with extracting files, I can quick show you. Go over here. Okay, on my system, it automatically throws it into downloads. And then if you show in folder, you should see it. And then if you double click, you can hit extract all. And you can actually choose a location for the files to extract to. And I hit browse and I chose my document folder. Okay, so make sure that you do that, otherwise you're going to have trouble editing those pages. So this is the extracted files from the folder that you downloaded, and you'll notice that I've got 3 different pages, and they all have the same content. Right now, they are pretty much identical. I have an internal CSS style sheet in each one, and there is no difference between them. So I think we'll start with grid. And I'm going to open it in Chrome. So this is what it looks like. We have some links, and there are some responsive aspects to this already. I did make the text and the graphics responsive. But we are going to make it even better, because first we're going to start with CSS Grid. I personally like CSS Grid the best because it is by far the most flexible. So I'm going to open up CSS Grid in VS Code. Okay, and so this internal style sheet that you see is the exact same in all of the files. And what we're going to do is kind of customize this for CSS Grid. And the first thing that we're going to do at the very top is we're going to specify box sizing border box. And what this does is it makes normally the margins and the padding are not included in the height and width, but this will tell the browser to include the padding, the margins in the actual width measurement. So if we said the max width was 200, it would include the margins and the padding in that. So for responsiveness, this is something that you're going to want. So we've got box sizing, and we're setting that to border box. Then as we look down here, you can see that I made the font size 1 EM for the heading. So basically 1 EM doesn't change the size of the text, but because I made it EM, that is responsive. So when we increase or decrease the size of the screen, the text is going to adjust correctly. You'll notice that for the image, I set the width to auto, and I did set a maximum height, because how we want this to lay out is we want multiple images in a row. And It looks kind of funny if the height is different. You don't get a very nice row. Okay, so I did set the height to be the same, but the widths are automatically going to adjust. I put a little border radius on that so that we'll get curved corners on the pictures. And you might have noticed that when we looked here, see how the corners are curved? All of these graphics are the same height, but you can see the widths are different. But eventually we want these in a row, so it will look better that way. You can see that I made any links that were in the page, not in the menu system, but in the page. I basically made them all the same color, and they aren't showing with an underline. I can see I misspelled styling, but we'll just have to live with that. For those of you that don't like that, you can fix it. But this is the styling for the menu. So I did it in an unordered list. This is something you should be familiar with, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time covering that. The navigation element was also styled with a background color and some padding. And that is this bar in the background. So that's why we have a little space between our little menu items and the edge of the navigation area. The header and the footer are styled kind of similar. You can see in the footer, I decreased the size of the text. So it's like 80% of the original. But you can see these are all pretty basic settings. Then the way the page is laid out, you can see we have a main section, and below that we have a header. We have our navigation area, which is our menu. We have an aside, which is our little warning. Then we have an article section. Within the article, we have 3 different sections. So basically within an article, which is going to be our row, we have 3 dogs. Okay, and so we have another article, which is going to be a row with 3 dogs. Okay, that's kind of how you can look at it. At the bottom, we have our footer, and this is where a link is located that is not in the menu. And that's kind of how we have everything set up. So for styling, inside the article, we have these sections. So this styling is for section elements that are inside article. And this is how we want them styled. So that's why they have a border around them. That is why the font is responsive. That's why there's a background color, all of that. And I did set a height on all of those. And because I did set a maximum height, I set the auto flow or the overflow to auto. For the aside section, which is this little warning, I also have that styled. Okay, so all of this styling is in there off the bat. All you're going to focus on is throwing in CSS Grid, and then any other adjustments that you would want to make so that it looks good. So for CSS Grid, we do want, let's see, we do want to set up our grid areas. So we'll do that at the very bottom. And we'll just put in a little comment here, grid classes. And so basically we're going to have a top section. Then we'll have our aside that we're going to call note. We're going to have a bottom section. We're going to have a menu. And then we're going to divide it into rows. And within the rows, we want 3 different columns. Okay, so we have top, and that's a grid area. And we're just going to give it a name of T. Okay, so these names that you give it do not need to be long. And then I'm going to copy this and we'll paste it a couple times and make some adjustments. So we've got top, we're going to have a bottom section. We're going to identify that with B. We're going to have a note section for the aside area. And we're going to call that N. We're going to have a menu. We'll call that M. And then we're going to have a left column. We're going to call that L. We're going to have a middle column. And we'll call that, now we can't call it M because we already have a grid area called M. So we'll call it mid. And then we're going to have a right area. So the classes go into the HTML. The grid areas that we've defined go into our grid template. So we have to define that grid template. And that is done inside a grid container. So we are going to set up a default grid container. So our default is going to have a class of grid container. And the display is grid. And the grid template rows, we are going to set up for max content. And what max content does is it sets the size of the row to the largest entry or element in the row. And then we're going to do grid template areas. And this is where we are going to, oh, we don't want none. This is where we are going to be telling it what grid areas we want to display. And for us, because we're going to be doing 3 columns in the main content area, I am going to use 6 letters on each row. So the first one is the top. So I'm just going to do 6 T's, and they are inside single quotes. Okay, so any area, the area that has that top class is going to be at the top of my page. Now below that, I want the menu to display. So I am putting in the M's. Okay, and I'm matching the number of M's to the number of T's. And now below the menu, this is where I want those 3 columns for my content. So I want the left, then I want the middle, and then I want the right. For the aside section that I'm going to give a class of note, I want that to be above the footer and below the content. So I'm going to put it right here. And then at the very bottom, I want the footer, which I have labeled B. So the grid areas, whatever you're calling them, they are what goes into your grid template. Okay, and then once you're done, you put the semicolon at the end. Okay, so this is my default. Now I need to connect these grid areas using the classes, I need to connect them to different parts of my page. So for the header, that was going to have a class equal to top. And the main element, that is going to be my container. Okay, so everything inside main, which is all of my content, is going to be part of that grid container. Okay, so everything inside main is going to have this template applied. So I have defined the header here as class equals top, and you can see that top has a grid area of T. So this is where the header is going to go. Then my navigation area obviously is my menu. So I'm going to give that a class equal to menu. Okay, and if you look here, that's going to go right below the header. Now the aside area, I don't want that to display until the bottom of the page. Okay, so that is getting a class equal to note. And because I have that area defined down here near the bottom, that is where it's going to display. So it's not going to render this page in order. Okay, it's going to look at the template and it's going to put the different sections where I have indicated. Okay, then this whole chunk here for article, this is going to be in my left column. Okay, so it's basically going to occupy this space right here. And then for this article, this is going to be my middle column. And then this last little article here is going to be my right column. So at this point, I have pretty much everything defined except the bottom area. And the bottom of the page is going to be my footer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, and you'll see that this is the aside section, and when I refresh, it should move. And it did, and now you can see I have columns. And if I resize the page, you'll notice everything gets smaller, but I do end up with a little scroll bar here. So I am going to want to maybe throw in a media query here and define something for mobile. And if I press FN and F12, and I turn this on, okay, so this still looks okay to me. I'm going to go in to responsive here, and we can kind of play with the widths, but I've kind of done this already. And so my little break point that I want is a maximum width of 750. So if the width is 750 or less, I'm going to change how this is displaying. Okay, so instead of displaying in 3 columns, I'm going to do a more mobile-friendly display for it. So let's go back over here. So this is my default. Below my default, I'm going to put my media query. And we're going to set a maximum width of 700 pixels, 750. So if it's 750 or less, then it's going to come through and use these settings. So I'm going to override the grid container. And I'm just going to adjust the grid template area. And so what I still want top. But below top, now I do want that note section. And then below the note section, I'm going to put the left information on one row. And I'm going to put the mid information on another row. Okay, and then I'm going to put the right on yet another row. And we'll stick the menu at the bottom. And then below that is the footer. Okay, so basically for mobile, it's going to convert to this format. So I'll put a little comment in here. Okay, and then I'm going to save it. Okay, and let me refresh. And let's try. And you'll notice that it's not changing because I made a little typo. I need to put a semicolon in here. So let me save this and let's try it again. All right, I'm going to go out of here and we will try this a different way. Let us change it like this. And that is what it's supposed to do. So you can see that it is working, and that is CSS Grid.